Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Apologies, I realize it's already 2 past the hour, but we're going to give not only myself another minute just to make sure I'm situated and comfortable, but everybody else just another minute or two to come into the webinar room. So thank you so much for giving up your time, and I'll keep an eye on the counter. And as we realize more people are settled and hopefully have their audio settings as they like, we will then jump into it. Super. I don't think I can sit in silence for 2 minutes, Gideon. So I'm sorry, that wasn't just 2 minutes that I said we'll be starting in 2 minutes, but I think that's been at least a full minute, and we've got actually 100 participants on already. And so out of respect for all of your time, don't worry, Gideon, no pressure. I think we should get cracking because, again, I'm sorry that I started a minute or two late already. My name is Eileen Burbidge, and I'm joined by Gideon Lieberman, and we are here to talk about, as we always do, employee benefits that'll make a meaningful difference. But today in particular, we're here to talk about how menopause workplace support can help attract and retain female employees. So with that, I'll take off this holding slide, which I'm sure everyone will appreciate, but I'm going to launch a poll. And when I do that, Gideon, would you mind taking the opportunity then to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi. Hello, everybody. My name is Gideon Lieberman. I'm medical director here at FATIFA. I'm a consultant gynecologist with a special interest in reproductive medicine and surgery. So that's all things reproductive related, including fertility surgery, fertility treatments, and menopause related problems, complex menopause issues. I've been a consultant in the NHS since 2006 and have been running clinics and helping people since then, and been with FT for 4 years and trying to support on all things reproductive medicine related. Looking forward to today's talk, actually, Lee.
Super. Thank you, Gideon. As ever, too modest. You haven't talked about recent books, for example, that have been published, recent appearances of yours. Maybe we'll save that to the end.
Okay.
But very, very modest. And thank you for taking the time. Gideon spends his time, like you said, over the last 4 years with us here as our medical director at FATIFA, also continues with private practice and then also at the NHS. So we are very fortunate to have him available today. And similarly, really, really pleased to have all of you. I've already given away the spoiler alert, which is there are more than 100 people on the webinar. And so it might be a good time, therefore, for me to just cover a couple of housekeeping rules. The webinar is being recorded, which hopefully you were alerted to when you joined and when I started it. We are really here to respect everybody's anonymity if they'd like. And so there's a Q&A function which you can use and then ask any questions as we're speaking and as we go for the next 45 minutes or so anonymously in that Q&A, which Gideon and I would appreciate and welcome at any point, by the way, because it breaks up the monotony for us just listening to one another speak, but ensures that we are covering topics or questions that are on your mind and relevant to you. We also have a chat function, but just so you know, that chat function has only been enabled for you to be able to send messages to Gideon and myself. So if there's anything that you wanted to share or for us to float or to mention, we are very happy to do that. And naturally, if there's any technical difficulties or any other questions that you have, please let us know that as well. So with those housekeeping points aside, and Gideon having introduced himself, albeit modestly, I will also just introduce myself real quick. My name is Eileen. I'm the executive director here at FATIFA. That means that I get the pleasure of feigning that I'm sort of leading the business, but really just taking the credit for all the great work that Gideon and the rest of our clinical services and all of our other operational teams do. We are Europe's most comprehensive reproductive health benefits provider based in London, servicing clients across all over the world, largely in the UK and EMEA, but also across North America, in the Middle East and Southeast Africa as well. So that's us in a nutshell. And we are here today to talk about menopause support in the workplace, which is why we started with those two poll questions just to get us going, and also for Gideon and I to sort of appreciate who's joined us today, and again, what might be relevant to all of you. So sharing the results of the webinar, and we had 80% participation. So thank you so much for everyone to take the time to answer. First question was whether or not there's already menopause support in place at your company. More than half of you, so about 59% said yes, 34% said no, and then 7% said not sure, which, as we know, is probably ultimately and effectively the same as no, because if individuals aren't aware or haven't seen signposting, that means they're certainly not availing themselves to that support either. So 60% do, but about 40% don't or aren't aware that you do. And then the second question was whether or not introducing either menopause support at all or additional menopause support, so whatever that additional might be, is that a priority then in this year? And 63% have said yes, whereas 37% have said no. So for those of you where it's not a priority, we're particularly grateful for your joining us, and hopefully we might cover some points, stats, business cases, or just relevant topics for you to be able to take into the organization and maybe make it a priority for 2025, or to help boost the chances of it becoming a priority in your order. And so those were the first two poll questions. I might come back with another poll towards the end of the conversation, just for us to be able to reflect on whether or not this has been an effective session for you or not. But thank you again for all of you responding. Gideon, does any of that surprise you? That 60% actually already do have some form of support. And actually that so many are also looking at making it a priority.
I think the 60% is great. I suppose it's a question about what that policy involves, and the devil's in the detail there. I am obviously surprised that there isn't a menopause policy, even if it's really basic in lots of companies, even just acknowledging that there's this thing called menopause and it affects people, even if that's your policy, it needs to be there. So I'm just, I suppose, working in the space, it's like, why isn't there? It's so obvious. It doesn't need to be complex. It doesn't need to be difficult, but we need to have one. So I'm just surprised, pleased, but also surprised.
It's a great point. It might be that we worded the poll maybe a bit too broadly, because maybe with support, certain people interpreted that differently. And maybe for some, maybe there is a policy that's in place, but perhaps they didn't view that as maybe hands-on enough support or support as they'd expected. And so as you see, and I can see you because we can all see your mouth moving, somebody had messaged to us, and I'll say it out loud so for the other participants to hear it as well. Somebody offered a bit of clarification on their answers. It's not a priority for them. That's why they were one of the sort of 37% that said it's not a priority in 2025 to put in more in place, but that's because they already have some. And the reason that they've joined the webinar today is to check that there isn't anything else that they've missed or anything that they could add. So while not a priority, they're keen to emphasize that there's already some support in place at their workplace, and it's become business as usual, if you will. So they don't feel like they have to make do special dispensation in order to incorporate menopause or additional menopause support, but they want to make sure they're still doing what they could be doing or what's available and what others are doing. So on that, I'll use that as a sort of a platform to invite other people, please, to let us know what you do have in place. So for the 40% it was 34% who said that they did have something, please do feel free to share. Yeah, it was 34%. Please do feel free to share in the chat for us what's already in place at your company. And we're happy to share that with other people as well. So folks get a sense for benchmarking and the like as we go, and they can take assurance that they're doing what they feel is reasonable and appropriate for their company, or that there might be more. So while we will take those points and I'll try to incorporate them as we go, what Gideon and I were hoping to cover, and like I said, we hope is relevant for you, but please keep engaging, keep letting us know and messaging if that's not the case. What we were going to talk about firstly was the impact of menopause in the workplace. Secondly, then we'd cover how to implement menopause support that will help attract and retain female employees. And then finally, we'll talk about long-term benefits that organizations can expect and that we hope they would see from investing in menopause support. That was the way we thought we would structure the conversation. Again, let us know if you'd like to hear different or not. But given that, and that the first topic is the impact of menopause in the workplace, Gideon, I was hoping you could get us going from a clinical point of view, and given all of the patients that you've supported, assisted, and spoken to through the years, how would you characterize, quantify, describe, or maybe just share with others who may or may not have experienced it themselves or had colleagues that have gone through it yet, the impact of menopause in the workplace?
Thanks, Alina. First of all, menopause affects everybody, and how can it affect men? Well, relationships with their partners, family, and for men to understand what their female colleagues are going through. I spoke to a company last week, and they said, "Well, we're not really that interested in having a menopause policy because most of our employees are men." And I kind of think actually they're the ones that really should have a menopause policy because they're the ones where there's a lack of understanding and education. And so it really allows them to expand their knowledge and support, understand what their female colleagues are going through. So I think it's a case of that should be there. Even if the majority of your employees are men, we've got to remember that our workforce is changing, and that um, menopause related issues affect a great deal of employees. I mean, we undertook the largest survey of menopausal, perimenopausal women in the workplace last year. And there were a number of amazing things that came out from that study. But one of the things that we noticed actually is the depth, severity of symptoms that women are experiencing, and the amount of time they are away from work, how much it affects work. Let's not forget that a woman who's going through the menopause, the main things we think of about hot flushes and night sweats, but don't forget brain fog, confusion. And I would expect 80, 90% of my patients to have some degree of cognitive challenge during the perimenopause. This doesn't mean that they're going to be bad at their job, but it's just going to be a bit more challenging for them. So that's a lot of people. 80 to 90% of people is a lot. And then if you think that most perimenopausal women will have challenges with what we call vasomotor symptoms, hot flushes, night sweats, feeling clammy, feeling uncomfortable, not just feeling great, then that's a really important thing to understand. And I would expect most of my, as I say, most of my patients to experience that. Another thing is sleep. We need great sleep, and there's lots and lots of new information about how important sleep is. And menopause, perimenopause really affects sleep. And I'd expect, again, 80 to 90% of perimenopausal women to be affected by these symptoms. So, the perimenopausal, menopausal symptoms, they're everywhere. They're really everywhere in perimenopausal women, and we've really got to understand it. That then flips into actually, actually affects how much time they spend dealing with their symptoms at work, how much time they spend off work, and then that then takes forward into actually what percentage of women will leave work in the perimenopause because of their symptomatology, because they are not supported, because they feel that they can't do their job. And from our study, we know 30, 40, 50% of women will feel like they're going to leave their job or leave their job. And remember, these are people who are the apex, the pinnacle of their career, their ability to do the job. And so that's what's happening to your workforce. That is what's happening to your workforce. And that's going to have a direct corollary on your output from your company, because you're either losing your really productive members of your team, or your productive members of the team are going to be less productive. So these are figures that you can't ignore. 80, 90% of bad symptoms, 30%, 40%, 50% leaving or thinking about leaving the workplace because of these symptoms. So these are really, really significant things. And like any disease process or physiological process, you've got to think about how the process affects lifestyle. So that could be work lifestyle, could be home lifestyle, could be relationships, and how the lifestyle affects the disease or physiological process. So how the work environment affects how people go through the menopause, as well as actually how the menopause affects their work. And it's this two-way dynamic that you have to think about. And it's always a bit of a moving thing, but we have to think about it in two ways. So it's really, really, really important that we take this very seriously, that we really incorporate a very constructive menopause policy into the workplace. That can be, as I said before, from just acknowledging that the menopause happens to having a very, very detailed structure about how one manages a workforce going through the perimenopause. And there's not one right answer for everybody. There's the right answer that's right for your situation. And maybe, Eileen, we can just explore that as we talk a little bit more today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I thought that it would be useful to recap some of those stats that you mentioned and also give the context of our survey. So, as I mentioned when I introduced myself and for TIFA, we obviously take pride in providing workplace support, navigational advice to employees of our client workplaces for all of reproductive health topics, as well as neurodiversity. But clearly, one of the most popular topics within women's reproductive, hormonal, and sexual health is menopause and perimenopause. And so we decided to undertake a survey last year. And it turned out, I don't think we set out to do this, but it turned out to be the largest ever survey on workplace support menopause in the UK. We had more than 3,000 respondents. And so some of those stats that you were saying, and I'll just summarize them for people in case they were taking notes, or like I said, they might be useful for internal business cases. You know, we found of our survey respondents that actually 1 in 10 were already, actually more than 1 in 10, sorry, 13% were currently looking for new jobs that included menopause support. If you would actually correlate that to the working population in the UK and the number of women obviously going through menopause, you're talking about 1 million women who are probably looking for new jobs or at least some level or higher level of menopause support in their workplace. 82% of them who responded said that they experienced the cognitive symptoms that Gideon mentioned. So includes brain fog, problems with memory and concentration. As Gideon emphasized, and I just want to reiterate, this doesn't mean that people are doing their jobs less ably. It just means that they're probably struggling internally with coping with the same level or the same sort of circumstances they've been used to. And so maybe some accommodation or adjustment is going to be necessary, or simply the well-being support that they are still supported within their roles. 89% experience then physical symptoms, which do include what's commonly discussed like hot flashes, definitely there's difficulty sleeping, migraine headaches, for example. And then 67% said that a combination of these symptoms or some symptoms from perimenopause or menopause had a negative impact in their work. And 17%, so nearly 28% or 1 in 5, had to take unplanned time off as a result of needing to manage their symptoms. So in addition to what Gideon was sharing from his clinical point of view and in talking to so many patients, these are survey respondents for us who have been able to help us quantify what the impact is of menopause in the workplace. The other thing I thought maybe, Gideon, we should take a chance to outline, because maybe not everyone is using the same sort of syntax or vocabulary as we are, is about when we're talking about menopause and perimenopause. I think you and I are probably using those somewhat interchangeably as it might affect women in the workplace. But technically speaking, we're talking about perimenopause, probably before a woman's last period. And you'll be better than me in saying this, so I'm teeing this up for you. But as we understand it, can affect women from 7 to 12 years before her last period or her last cycle, right? So even women in their 30s.
Thanks. Yeah, let me just go through some words, and I think that everybody gets this confused. The menopause is defined as a woman's last period, okay? And this is normally in the UK between the ages of 47 and 51. And a year after her last period, she's called postmenopausal. So if she has her last period today, a year and 1 day, time should be postmenopausal. Her whole life before today is premenopausal, before the menopause. Okay. When a woman starts developing symptoms of decreasing ovarian activity, hormones going, that's what we call a perimenopause. And traditionally, our society would have called this the change, the menopause, but actually we call it perimenopause, which means around the time of the menopause. And you can still get the same symptoms before and after your last period, but we talk about this time as being the perimenopause, time around the menopause, when a woman starts becoming symptomatic. In the UK, on average, that's about 7 years before a woman's last period. So on my maths, that's somewhere between starts somewhere between the ages of 42 and 44. But remember that 1% of women, 1% of women, so it's quite a lot actually, 1% of women will have their final period before the age of 40. It's quite a lot of women actually, 1%. So 1% to a doctor is actually quite a lot. And 5% of women will have their final period before the age of 45. So if we do our maths again, we can just see that perimenopausal symptomatology might begin in a woman's late 30s. 5% of women, so it's quite a lot. The 5% of women will start to get symptomatic in their late 30s. And that's not traditionally the age group that we associate with decreasing ovarian function, with being perimenopausal. So I'll see loads of women who are in their late 30s, in their very early 40s, say, I just don't feel quite right. Periods are a bit irregular. I just don't feel right. I'm a bit more XYZ. Insert your symptom there. And I've been told by their healthcare provider that they can't be perimenopausal because they are just too young, and that's actually not true. One of the really interesting things for me from our survey was the amount of women in their mid to late 30s that were aware of menopausal and perimenopausal symptoms, or beginning to suffer from. And that is a real eye-opener, eye-opener. And I was really surprised at that, because it actually is a paradigm shift. And I think we're used to women in their mid to late 40s be coming forward with menstrual, psychological, and vasomotor symptoms, the traditional symptoms of menopause, but we're not really used to seeing that in women in their late 30s. I think sort of hiding it. I think there's a lot in our culture about why women don't come forward. I think there's a lot that it's hidden because of certain types of contraceptives. I think there's a lot in it, but actually the perimenopause, which is when a woman becomes symptomatic, we just need to think about that being a bit of a wider, having a bit of a wider range than we're traditionally thinking is traditionally thought about. And it's so important to be aware of it, because I think there must be loads of women out there who just don't feel quite right. And they think, oh, it can't be menopause or perimenopause because I'm just too young. And sometimes you just have to look into that a little bit.
No, thank you, Gideon. You've said a few things that I thought I would pick up on, if that's all right. Again, so we're talking about vocabulary and language, and somebody kindly also reminded of this in the chat. They appreciated when you said people affected earlier on. So we're obviously talking about perimenopause, menopause, and female reproductive health. We do mean, of course, people assigned female at birth. We appreciate that there will be trans men who will also go through perimenopause and menopause as well. So we're not trying to be exclusive by any means, but it probably is Gideon and myself being a bit comfortable with our language and the fact that we use some of this interchangeably. But of course, we are talking about people assigned female at birth. So thank you for that reminder. And Gideon had said that early on as well. The other point I wanted to make was, as you say, we saw also in the survey, and I'm just going to quantify it a bit, actually, that 29% of those who responded to the survey said that the fear of stigma or some form of discrimination or some negative reaction was preventing them from getting support that they wanted in the workplace. And more than 60%, so 61%, of those who responded said they didn't feel comfortable discussing menopause with either their line manager or their HR manager. And I think that's really quite crucial, and exactly the point that you were mentioning, that not many people or enough people are coming out and talking about it, whether they're in their 30s or otherwise. We've seen that of everybody attending the webinar today, 60% have some form of support in place in their workplace. But we're also seeing on the other side of the fence that more than 60% of women are saying they're still not comfortable discussing it with their line managers or their HR managers. And so we'll get onto this, I think, in the next section, which is types of support that can be offered. But I think a lot of it has to do with signposting, offering this almost subconscious, but enough signals and enough indications that there's a safe space to have the conversation, that the support is available in some shape, way, or form, which might just mean, please feel comfortable to talk about this. There will be no sort of, negative connotations to it or negative impact to you. So I wanted to mention those points. And then to also reiterate the point you were making, Gideon, somebody has kindly messaged us to say that they were 36 years old when they began their menopause journey. So when they probably started experiencing perimenopausal symptoms. So that is absolutely bang on point what you were saying. So having covered that section, and I appreciate lots of people have messaged us to tell us about different types of support they've already got in place, which is great. And I will go through them to summarize for others. But I think we should then go into this next section, which is how to implement menopause support. So what are some examples? And I think, we would certainly make the case here at Fertifa about trying to go beyond tick box exercises and not just trying to be performative about it or to say that something's in place unless there's this genuine intention to provide some form of well-being support, because we know that employees will be more likely to stay at a company if they feel that their well-being is being prioritized. So did you want to start by offering, you've mentioned in your opening pieces, some of the types of support that you would expect to see or you're surprised not to see or not to hear about. Do you want to go through some of the types of support? Because I know you've got a few particular pet ones that you often like to talk about.
Yeah. Thanks very much, and thanks so much for the people in the chat for adding in. It's really. I think just to come back to the chat, I think the inclusivity is really important. I think it's really important. I'm just going to start with inclusivity and the comment about trans men. And I think the challenges with trans men really is very interesting because it's a group of people where traditional models of hormone replacement therapy may not be applicable. Within that, there is a subset. And in my experience of dealing with trans men and menopause, you have to really think about it quite a lot and have a model that's bespoke to that individual. And it takes a little bit of thinking about, because what may be applicable to one individual may not be suitable, acceptable to another, really. But people have symptoms, and actually and I sort of abstract whatever their backgrounds are from their symptoms, and actually trying to understand what their symptoms are, what bothers them, what is a real issue for them, and focusing on that. So I think inclusivity is kind of where I would start, and that's why I think my starter is always, there's this thing called menopause, and this is why menopause happens, and explain why menopause happens. And it's really, I think, important to understand that menopause, it kind of happens in different ages and different groups. But if you were born with ovaries, then you will have a menopause at some point. That's how it is. So I think I always start with this inclusivity statement and an explanation of it. And many people, lots of doctors, I have to say, don't really understand what menopause is. And menopause is really simple. It's just when you run out of eggs, and that happens because there is a finite amount of eggs. And actually just understanding that and then saying, well, what does that mean? Well, without eggs, you can't conceive. But actually, in this instance, without eggs, you're not going to produce a number of the sex hormones, estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, and that brings on symptoms. So I start with a very, very, very general explanation of why menopause happens, so you're clear about it. And then I try and then I try and go into, and then I think about symptoms because I'm a clinical doctor. I think about symptoms. And so when I'm thinking, I think, what are the things that bother me? What are the things that bother my patients when I see them? So I know that there'll be some symptoms that they can live with and how I address them, and some symptoms that are really difficult for them. So when I think about how I deal with symptoms, I think about uh, lifestyle modifications, I think environmental changes. I make sure that there is an understanding about how people work and the flexibility about how people work. I'll come back to that in a second. But for instance, and we don't think about, people don't think about the proximity to lavatories, to loos for women who've got really bad sudden heavy periods that happen all the time around the perimenopause. Okay, and actually how important it is for people to be able to get to loo, to have lockers near loo so they can change clothing and have all the apparel that they'll need to get through the day. I think that's an important one for me. You know, it's interesting. I think in the debate that's been happening over the past maybe 2 or 3 months about working from home, my view as a layperson, my view as a doctor is that when I see people on the TV talking about it, all men talking about the importance of working in the office. And actually, my experience as a clinician is that many women want to have some time to work from home because they can work effectively from home. I can imagine, but I don't understand how awful it must be to get on public transport, knowing that you need to use the loo but can't go there, and that really just being an awful journey, and that's before they've got into work. So I think the environment is really important. So I start with a basic understanding of what it is. Then I think about the environment, about the working environment. And then from there, I kind of think you need to look into what adaptations are right for you in your company. So be it education, be it menopause champions, be it sources of information that you can send your employees to, be it getting involved with a company like Fatifa, be it involved with another resource or clinical resource that people can use, be it that they can have time off work to deal with menopausal symptoms, treatments, time away. I think that there's lots that can be done, but for me, the important thing is to start with the diagnosis, explain what it is, think about adaptations, simple adaptations, and then take that into what is right for you in the workplace.
Thank you, Gideon. I know some of those favorite ones. The other ones that you often talk about that you haven't touched on, or maybe you did and I was away with fairies, but when we talk about flexible hours or time off or being able to take time away, I really like how you usually talk about that and frame that. Do you mind?
Yeah, I think that I think that when I think about my patients and they talk about some of their symptoms and the symptomatology, and they'll talk about hot flushes. The hot flushes come and the hot flushes go. Okay, and different things bring them on, and we can talk about why they happen and triggers and stuff. But they don't last forever. And I think it's really important for people to be able to flag 20 minutes out. Say, listen, don't feel so great. I'm going to get out of here for a few minutes. Here's my phone. It's going to go down here, and I'm going to walk away. I'm going to walk out of here for 20 minutes, and I'm going to come back again. So I think actually, when people think about time away from work, they should actually think about little bits. It's better than like a whole day, because you can feel lousy for a whole day, but actually you really feel lousy for half an hour, 20 minutes, and then you can come back. You may have an episode of that needs personal attention, that needs 20 minutes, half an hour. And I think that adaptation of actually being able to take little aliquots of time out during the day is really important, and to say, need a break, gotta go. And actually being able to do that. And the understanding of the team is so important. So I hear all the time about people who the managers are worried about bringing in a policy that gives people time off because of the amount of extra pressure it might put on the rest of the team. And I think the answer to that is the team works better when every individual is well. And the team would rather somebody just went away, did whatever they did, came back and was working effectively. So I think small amounts of time are really, really effective. Obviously, there's the concept of what we talk about for TIFA as well-being days, and if you actually need some time for like a semi-planned medical journey appointment, to get your head together, to take a day off just to go and sit in the garden because you're just having one of those days. And we all get them, but you get more of them in menopause, you get more of them in perimenopause. And that's okay because I think the team understand. Now, these are all very high flying, fruity ideas, but I think there's some practical applications here of being able to take 10 minutes, 20 minutes here and just say, I'm going to take my well-being 20 minutes. Sorry, guys, I'm going to get up. And when we come back, we'll get back to the task. I think that's really important. And actually, that's my favorite one at the moment. I can go on and talk about how we can incorporate mindfulness and mindfulness practice into that 20 minutes, maybe slightly outside the remit of this conversation, but these small aliquots of time, these flags, and to hold up a yellow note and say, I'm just going to take 20 minutes for what it is. And my experience is that people, the rest of the team don't mind that. I think it's really great for team cohesiveness because it's the identification and realization that all of us have medical issues and need a little bit of time out from time to time.
Thank you. I know it's your favorite. That's why I wanted to make sure we didn't leave it out. But I think it's a good time because somebody has mentioned this point. I know we've talked about it recently. We had a great opportunity to have a sort of a Friends of Fertifa breakfast recently where we got the chance to see in person, in real life, some of our clients as well as those that we're speaking to about this. And it came up at that breakfast as well as somebody making the point earlier in the chat. You know, where do you think the employer's responsibility sort of begins and ends? So one of the person who asked the question here in the session was, do you think menopause, either symptoms or, individuals going through the menopause should be treated any differently than other sickness, illness, general health? And then another question was, how much of it do you think is the employer's duty? Would love your views on that before I go into some of the other things or try and recap some of the ideas that you'd mentioned.
I don't really know the answer. I've thought about this concept of duty of care. Actually, where does the duty of care of the employer not begin but end? I think it's really important. I think the duty of care is always there with the employer, that actually the employer does have a duty of care to look after the employee to a certain amount. Now, how much that is, you just got to find the right answer for you. Your duty of care is to make sure that I think that they're well enough to work and they're productive enough to work and that they're not under any undue duress to work. And that, I think that's kind of my very broad understanding of duty of care. But nevertheless, there is a huge duty of care of an employer to the employer, and just to make sure that they are well enough. They are well enough to work and they can work in a way that's good for them. And this concept of good enough and this concept of well enough, I think, is really, really interesting and really dynamic, and it's really fluid. So an individual might feel well enough, good enough to do a task today, but may feel less able to do that task tomorrow. And ideally, if I had an ideal world, I would modify their roles, their responsibilities to fit in with their physicality and their menopause journey. I know that's not realistic. I really do know that's not realistic. But what I do know, it's okay to turn around and say somebody to say, I'm going to do this task today because I can do it. I can do whatever it is, and I'm going to concentrate on something else tomorrow because I just don't feel up to it, or I feel great today. I want to do that. So I think that the duty of care is different for different employers, but we really need to be flexible in actually how we look after people in the wider sense at work. And I just think the acknowledgement, and I just go back to where I started, the acknowledgement that menopause is a thing. And once you've identified that thing, once you've said that thing, it becomes less of a scary thing. And then we can adapt and modify. And my belief, and I kind of think this is borne out by people that we speak to, is that once people understand this and it is integrated into everyday employee practice, you get a better workforce. You get people more turning up because they're not afraid to say, I just feel a bit lousy or I need to go home early, but I'm happy to do work later. I'm going to do it from home there. And I think that understanding is really crucial in helping produce a better team. That's really what I think about it.
No, I'm glad you sort of ended there, because I was going to offer my two sort of sense to it. And I think part of the reason we enjoy always or often doing these together is you offer a really strong clinical view, and appreciate you recognizing what's realistic or not, or maybe practical for a commercial organization or not. But you're coming at it from a clinical view, thinking about patients' well-being and a patient's health. I would just add to what you said from maybe a commercial point of view, and some may know that I'm also an investor as well as an operator. Commercially, it's an interesting question, like you said, Gideon, about what one's duty is as an employer. But I would say commercially, if an organization is interested in getting, maximum or optimal levels of productivity out of their talent, their employees, the people they care about, those who they're supporting through payroll and through the salary and other benefits, then they would want them to feel like they could bring their best selves to work, and that it would be therefore a really straightforward business case to look after their well-being in order to maximize the contribution of your employees. If you're going through the trouble of employing them in the first place, why would you not try to optimize the experience for them and yourself as a place of work? Why would you, not try to improve or better a situation that you might know was negatively impacting their ability to contribute, right? That would be my answer to that. So having said that, then to recap some of the things you said, and also to make the point again, that actually it's 17% of women in responding to our survey, or individuals that responded to our survey, said that they had to take unplanned time off in order to manage their symptoms relating to perimenopause and menopause. So I think that's one of the most obvious points of support, but I will try and recap. And I'm sorry this isn't on a slide or structured, but it's because in real time, I've taken note of what everyone's mentioned to us in the chat that we see, as well as some of the things that you've already mentioned. And I want to try and summarize all the different types of support that people's volunteered to us that they have in their workplace and what you emphasize. So I think we'll start with the key point, and I'll probably finish with this as well, which is the awareness and the education, and simply making sure and acknowledging, which is the word that you kept using, Gideon, that menopause and perimenopause and those symptoms are a thing or is a thing. So acknowledging that perimenopause and menopause can be debilitating, can affect individuals, acknowledging is a thing, therefore creating awareness materials. And many people in the chat, I'm really glad to see, said that they had awareness training. They mentioned awareness documents. They mentioned management training. They also mentioned policies, which obviously go forward for talking about the awareness. So there's that awareness piece within the policy, and beyond awareness then, we had people that were offering that in their workplace. They also had champions or mentors. And I know this is another one that you really, really rate, Gideon, and you think is really important, so that people have people to go to. They don't necessarily have to be clinical professionals, but just individuals, because you had a comment about when people don't feel right. And I would have said, not even don't feel right, because that's hard to measure, but don't feel themselves, that they can speak to somebody about how that feels. So I think that's an extension of awareness. And then, of course, the manager training I've already talked about. So champions, mentors, and then within the policy, addition to all these awareness points, some things you talked about were the flexible time. So whether it's time off, whether it's minutes in the day, whether it's being able to have well-being days, or whether it's reasonable adjustments on, you mentioned access to toilets, the bathroom, maybe access to temperature control, maybe accommodation and adjustments for uniforms. And somebody else also already mentioned this, who's on the webinar, that they have this. So these are just very tactical, practical points. Beyond those reasonable adjustments, then, we've heard from people who have offered that they have employee networks, they have groups. They also have maybe occupational health nurses and access to occupational health professionals that'll support menopause in their workplace. We have heard that people have cash plans, EAP, so employee assistance programs, that are in their workplace as well. And so I think that covers all of the ones that were offered in the chat. I'm reading from my notebook, so off screen, because I wrote them down when reading everybody's chat. If there's anything I missed that people want me to emphasize that is available in their workplace and I didn't pick up on, feel free to let me know. But I think those are all the ones that we talked about. And like you said, all the ones that you think are really important, but it really does go back to the starting point of acknowledgement, doesn't it? Because once people feel comfortable having the conversation, you'll find out from them what is going to support them the most. And oftentimes it's just that conversation, isn't it, Gideon?
Yeah, it's a journey. It's a journey. So an interesting journey that we've had at Fatifa, and I was reflecting on that this morning, is the conversations that we have in the workplace. And when we have new team members coming in, they're kind of a little bit surprised about what we're talking about over our computers, over our coffee. And actually, I think there's a huge amount of once you name something, once you talk about something, you depower it a lot, don't you? You take away the mysticism of something. You take away the a lot of the emotional associations and baggage with it. You've got to recognize that menopause is uh, a a a inbuilt medical occurrence in people, and it's just another bit of medicine, and it's very personal to an individual. Get that 100%. But in trying to help the individual, we really just need to acknowledge it and talk about it. And the more we talk about it, the more we acknowledge it's a normal thing, and the more that we're able to adapt our workplaces to get the best out of the individual. That's how you said I need to be the most productive person. But for me, it's actually, I'm worried about the company, obviously, but I'm actually more concerned about the individual, but more concerned about how the symptoms and how that person is existing. And I think an important part of the menopause, the duty of care by the employers is education of the individual, is education of everybody in the company to help people through this journey. Because I always joke that the menopause clinics that I run, they always run overrun. And why do they always overrun? It's not because I'm talking a lot, it's because people want to be heard. People want to talk about their journey. People want to be listened to. And it's really, really important because traditionally they're not heard. They're they're not heard. And the more we talk about it, the more we engage in it, the more we demystify it, and the more we understand it, the better it's going to be for the individual and also therefore the company.
Amazing, thank you. And so I think having gone through all of the sort of various points that different people and different companies, oh, and actually, sorry, somebody mentioned one thing that I missed and wasn't mentioned already, which is sanitary products in all of the ladies' toilets. And I think we're very lucky because in our workplaces, our office, we have that. So I've probably started to take it for granted, but it is a huge, huge relief. For me personally, I'm happy to offer that. I'm perimenopausal. And so I imagine that's an adjustment that Gideon you would support as well. I should have mentioned that in the first place, or I'm glad to someone for pointing that out.
Yeah, I think we covered it before. It's really, really important. And it's just, does it, is it, it may be we're looking at this the wrong way, and that you wouldn't expect toilet not to have a lock or toilet paper, so water. So why isn't the baseline to have sanitary products? I don't know. I mean, this is just, it's not an added one, this is a baseline.
No, yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I'm mindful that it's 10 minutes till the hour, and I usually like to give people at least a few minutes back before they have to probably jump onto another call. And so what I'm going to do, even though we still have one more section to cover, you're not off the hook yet, Gideon, which is a sort of a recap in terms of, how we really see what the impact is and what benefits are to offering the support and some of the sort of real world sort of benefits for organizations, because I promised that when I mentioned the 3 topics we talked about. I'm also going to launch a poll. I mentioned this, I hinted this. We have another poll now that I would love for people's feedback with regards to whether or not the webinar was actually relevant to them, what they expected and useful. I'm also going to put in the chat so that people have it before they might start dropping off, how they can get in touch with our commercial team if there's anything that they would like to find more information about. For instance, somebody had asked whether or not we have experts, whether it's yourself, Gideon, or others, who could maybe join employee network groups, or from time to time to talk to colleagues. And so if anyone has any questions for our commercial team, that is the address or the website, the webpage in order to submit a form that I've just put in the chat. And thank you. I see people responding to the poll too. So yes, this last section, just to round us off and maybe just the next 2 or 3 minutes get in, was to recap the long-term benefits that organizations will see or realize from investing in menopause support. Now, I'm sure you've got a number from a clinical point of view. I'll start on this case with the commercial point of view. So we know, for example, that supporting women through perimenopause and menopausal symptoms will reduce the gender pay gap, which is clearly a requirement to report for organizations of a certain size here in the UK. We know it'll increase productivity. Not talking very clearly today. It will also reduce absenteeism. And we know that it improves employee engagement. And then the last point would be better health outcomes. And I assume that's pretty obvious to you, Gideon, but I didn't know if you had anything else you wanted to add to that with respect to the health outcomes.
No, I think you got my answers in there, thankfully. And what I would say is just the way that I would look upon it from a doctor is that it's a difficult time. And the more education, the more support people have, the better they will get through it.
Yeah. I mean, you must see that all the time from again, a clinical point of view. The earlier somebody recognizes that there might be something to explore, to look at, or to speak to a medical professional about, the better and the easier it is to handle and to manage that.
Yeah, I mean, if I've got a second here, I often talk about and uh, explore the options of lifestyle changes, hormonal support earlier rather than later. And you will hear people say it again and again, I don't need X, Y, and Z yet. Or I'm waiting till my symptoms get really bad until I do Y. I'm kind of like, don't do that. First of all, it seems like a weird way to live your life, to like put yourself in misery just because when there are options available. Interventions are not going to stop what's going to happen
Mm.
to biologically. If you do an intervention, it's not going to stop the loss of eggs and the menopause. Nothing's going to stop that. It's going to happen. It's just how you experience it, how you experience it. So don't wait, get interventions early. I was just looking through the chat, and there was somebody who thanked who thank you for sharing, but began their journey at 36. For me as a doctor, these are the people that I really want to see. I really want to get involved with because I know I can introduce an intervention that's going to change their long-term quality and quantity of life. So don't forget, the earlier you go through the menopause, if you don't intervene, unfortunately, the shorter your life will be, and the more you're likely to get certain other conditions. So really, early intervention and the understanding of intervention not being a particularly bad thing for most people is really important. So I kind of think that's where I would go with it.
No, thank you so much. And that is, like I said, probably very obvious to you from a clinical point of view. Going back to the commercial point, somebody has really kindly offered another report. So in addition to what we've been saying and endorsing here, so I'll copy and paste it into the chat because it looks like they're quoting a workplace well-being and firm performance report recently conducted by the University of Oxford and then Harvard. And they've also included the download or the PDF for that. And the summation of that is that company well-being proves to be a significant predictor of firm performance, so commercial performance across a wide variety of indicators. So clearly this is not just about menopause, but since that's the topic today, and we know how many people will suffer from perimenopause and menopausal symptoms, we actually know that menopausal women is the fastest growing demographic in the workplace in the UK today. Not the largest by numbers, because that would be millennials, but fastest growing. So this is obviously really, really important. And then the other point I wanted to make, only because somebody's invited it, which is really, really kind, is just to recap what we do at Fertifa, because I appreciated the poll responses that we've gotten, and also the points that getting pleased to know that 98% said that this was a useful webinar and that it might make them more interested in enhancing their menopause support. At Fertifa, what we can help you do, obviously, is provide coverage, well-being support, and navigational advice for all of your employees, but also line manager training, HR training in terms of menopause, but also all of reproductive, hormonal, and sexual health journeys, including fertility and family forming, men's hormonal, reproductive, and sexual health, and also neurodiversity. And we do that through awareness and education available in our app. We also do it through unlimited one-to-one well-being support and the navigational advice. We can also provide access to diagnostics and testing, and we can also help administer a reimbursement policy that a company might want to put into place, or through a payment plan that we could administer as well. So that's a really quick elevator pitch. Sorry about that, but I want to make sure that it's contextualized with everything that we're hopefully sharing with everyone. And so, yes, I'll be happy to share also the results of the poll with people. So yeah, 98% said that they're interested now in enhancing their menopause support, which is brilliant. Most don't feel the need to work with a menopause benefits provider, and that's all right. We're here again for advocating for awareness and education. And so to the extent that people found it useful and that they're probably looking to increase the support, I think that's job done for us today, Gideon. And for those that, 37% might look to work with benefits provider in future, I had put into the chat where you can book in a call with our team. And with that, I've only given 2 minutes back, but I'll look to close the webinar now so that people at least have a minute before the next call. And I'll just take this chance to thank you, Gideon, for joining me.
Thank you very much, Helen. Cheers.
And for everyone for tuning in. And of course, to the team at Fertifa who helped us get this all set up and running. We really appreciate everybody's time today. So thank you all.